Hey, I'm MCARBO, brother. I'm Chris Nelson, president of MCARBO. Really excited to introduce a new Ruger SP101 GP100 trigger spring kit for your Ruger double action revolver. A fantastic trigger spring kit and shim kit all in one, but on top of that, we also polished all the internals. We dropped the trigger pull well over 50%. Really impressed with the trigger pull reduction and the new smooth action. I mean, this thing is night and day, way different. It's not even the same pistol anymore, if you ask me. Phenomenal. Really impressed with it. I'm excited to hear your feedback. We even went as far as lapping the crown on this and removed all the machine marks, the burrs. A really phenomenal revolver. It's just they're mass produced, and those feeds and feeds, when they are machining this, they are really leaving a lot of burrs all over the place, making it a gritty, heavy, terrible trigger pull, which is a lot of the complaints. Now we don't have to worry about that. We've got an all-in-one complete DIY trigger job. Really impressed, really excited about this. I can't wait to hear your results. Let's get on over to tabletop, put this baby in. Before we get started, let's go ahead and check our firearms together, make sure they're clear. Check the cylinder, check the chamber, this firearm's clear. Let's see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 10 pounds, 0.6 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 9 pounds, 12.7 ounces. Parts and tools needed for this build: the Ruger SP101 GP100 trigger spring kit by MCARBO. This includes your 9.5 pound hammer spring, 7.5 pound trigger return spring. It's got your synthetic grease with PTFE to help increase that lubricity, less drag, less wear. It's also got your hammer shims, there's 4, and it's also got your trigger shims, there's 4. So in various thicknesses as well. The trigger shims are 1/1000th of an inch, which is very thin, very hard to get, very hard to come by. Trust me, we had to get these manufactured here, and it was a nightmare. So 1/1000th of an inch, to give you an idea, 3/1000th of an inch is the thickness of your standard paper. So 1/1000th of an inch, it's just microscopic. So great. It's nice when you're doing this precision work and you're trying to take up that play, side to side play in the trigger. Same with the hammer shims. It's going to get rid of that wobble, that nasty wear if it's out of alignment. So this is great. Really excited. Now we've got a hammer. You're going to need a 1/16 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, needle nose pliers, flathead screwdriver, and then also you've got some stuff over here. This is something new. We're going to do some polishing in this video as well. We want to do the best job that we can. It's full, comprehensive, detailed DIY trigger job, but you're also going to do some polishing while you're at it. So we also sell an MCARBO firearms polish kit, which has got these bullet shaped felt bits. These are hard to come by as well. Took us a good amount of time to finally be able to get them. And it's got a set of gloves and obviously your Flitz polish, which is the industry standard. You got a Dremel here with the bit already attached. You don't have to have a Dremel. You can get the Harbor Freight special. This is a rotary tool. All right, so $8, you get all the components that come with it, and it works just fine. This is a feeler gauge set. I would highly recommend. If you want to know as far as gap between the trigger or the hammer, this is going to let you know. So it'll go all the way down to 1/1000th of an inch. So it's 1/1000th and then half a tenth right there. So 0.001, and then you got to the 4th decimal there, which is the 5. So 1.5 thousandths of an inch, which is really fine. You can see how thin that is. So these are pretty inexpensive as well. You can pick them up anywhere. Feeler gauge is what it is. It'll allow you to test that gap. So that's great. As always, going to make sure we're wearing eye pro. And some other handy, useful items here. These schematics are on the website, so if you want to know the nomenclature, go through it. It's a good way to learn as you're doing this, trust me. You're going to have a real in-depth, thorough knowledge of your firearm when you're done. You should be able to do it blindfolded. So nomenclature here, just joking. Nomenclature here, you're going to get the basic overlay of what all the components are and how to say it and what, you know, we try to learn as we do this stuff, obviously. And then your schematic breakdown, which is very handy. You're trying to reassemble this. It's always good to have a picture reference and then the part names down here as well. So we're going to go through that. We're going to use proper nomenclature during this video. Really excited about it. This is a first time doing the revolver video, and it's going to be in-depth, thorough. We're doing the polishing, the kit. Man, we're going to do it all. So let's jump on into it. So we get started by taking our flathead screwdriver and removing this grip panel screw here. Go ahead and do that. All right, pull it right out. Next thing is you'll twist the grip. That's going to allow the grip panels just to pop right out like that. It's nice and easy. You'll notice once you remove that grip panel on the right side, you've got the disassembly pin here and the grip retaining pin here in the center. Now this disassembly tool, you can supplement with a paper clip if need be. It's not completely necessary to have it, but it is good to have. So go ahead and we'll pop that out here in a second, or it may just fall out in your hand like that. Set that aside. Now we'll twist the grip panel on the other side to just pop it loose, which is a nice way to do that. All right, now we've got to get rid of this pin here. So you just push it right out, or you'll take one of your punches. Now you'll take your punch and just push out that grip retaining pin. Real easy to do, slides right out, okay? Set that aside. Now we're gonna slide the grip right off. Just kind of shimmies off like that, okay? Rubber grip, set that aside. Now we can see the internal mainspring assembly. This is your hammer spring here, which sits on the hammer strut inside there. So we're gonna actually take a good thorough look at that. First thing is we need to remove this mainspring assembly. So what we'll do is we'll half cock this hammer, and that'll allow us to get access to that hole down here. And we'll take that little disassembly pin and drop it right into that hole, okay? The tension is captured on that mainspring assembly, and it'll drop right out. You just gotta make sure the hammer goes back forward for this mainspring assembly to drop right out, okay? And you'll notice when it came out, right, the way it's oriented, this is very critical and important to take notice of. So this slant right here, you can see it's sloped. And you can see there's this curvature, this cutout here with these 2 points on the bottom, right? Okay, so the way this is oriented, it's toward the tip of the barrel, okay? Just remember this hammer strut slope and these 2 points on the mainspring seat. This little piece of metal down here is the mainspring seat, all right? So these 2 points and this slope are pointed towards the tip of the barrel. That's most critical to remember. If you forget, we've got a nice handy printout on the website as well for all these important critical notes, so you can just print it out and not worry about it. So let's move on. So then we'll set this aside for now, but we will take quick notice of everything as we go along. There will be some polishing done here. All right, so we're gonna come back to it in a second, but we're gonna leave it like this. It's helpful. We don't need to address it right this minute. We need to take the rest of the firearm apart. So the next is removing the hammer. All right, so that's the process. The main hammer spring assembly comes out first, then the hammer, and then the trigger guard. So let's go ahead and remove this hammer. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and remove the hammer assembly. You'll notice here I've got a little bench block. This is something that we're doing that's new. It's a 3D printed block. If you guys want something like this, these are prototypes, you know, $5 or whatever. I mean, we'll figure something out, but that's what I was thinking. Something handy, useful to have. The block of wood with the hole in it is fine. We just decided we're gonna start doing something a little bit different. So remove the hammer assembly. We're gonna push out the actual hammer pivot pin right here. Take your 3/32 inch punch, do that. Push out the pin. All right, you can use the punch with a hammer if necessary, and then pull back about 1/2 to 3/4 of the way, and it'll slide right out like so, okay? Now we're going to get a closer look here at the hammer assembly. We're actually going to push out this pin that holds it all in. Now take your 1/16 inch punch and go ahead and just push out this hammer dog pivot pin. Now your hammer dog is this piece here, okay? And you'll notice, look at the orientation, definitely take a good look at that and remember how it all goes together. So you're going to push that pivot pin through, all right? And you keep your finger on it because it's under some tension. There is a hammer dog spring and plunger underneath this hammer dog, all right? And you'll notice we're just gonna drop it right out. You'll see how it goes in there, okay? So the little short end is up here towards the top of the hammer, and then the longer end is down here towards that hammer sear, all right? We're gonna be polishing the hammer sear, this lower tip of the hammer dog, we're gonna polish that. And then just for informational purposes here, there you go. There's the plunger and the spring, and it goes right into that hole. That's where it locates. So we'll just drop it back in so we don't lose it for now. But I am gonna make a couple little notes as we're going here since we're doing some polishing. A little dab right here with the Sharpie. You don't need to do this unless you want to. This is gonna help me in the video. All right, we're gonna do those undersides and this little top ridge here. Polishing is just gonna be, you know, it's just fine detail work. It's nothing that, it's not sanding. It's very, very minor, but it makes a major impact and a major difference in terms of smoothness, function. You'll notice it. And it's all those nice, subtle differences that make a major night and day difference in terms of function, reliability, accuracy, performance. It really takes this firearm to the next level. All right, so we're gonna set these components aside. Now let's go ahead and remove the trigger guard assembly. So you do that by taking your 3/32 inch punch and sliding it right through that hole in the frame and pushing on the actual trigger guard latch right there. It's under spring tension, All right, and we're going to do that simultaneously while pulling up on the trigger guard itself, up and out. All right, there you go. Nice. Now it gets interesting. Go ahead and set the rest of the firearm aside. Let's focus on the trigger assembly. All right, now let's do a quick overview of the trigger assembly, and you do need to be careful here. Do not pull this trigger while it's out like this, and I'll go over that here in a second why, but you'll notice that you're under a lot of tension here. So you've got your trigger guard latch here, and then inside you've got your trigger guard latch spring, which is also your trigger return spring that we're going to be replacing with a 7.5 pound trigger return spring. You've also got a plunger in there for the trigger link. Okay, and the link is what actually connects the trigger with that trigger return spring. You'll see there's an actual link in here. It's under tension, which is what obviously gives us that trigger return. Now here we've got the transfer bar, we have the Pawl, and this is what's most troubling. You got to be careful. This Pawl, there's a spring and detent under there, which it is very easy to lose, and I'm speaking from personal experience here. We actually had to order one off of Brownells, so if you lose one, go to Brownells, you'll get one there. Now it's very simple, so if you pull that trigger, that Pawl goes forward and that spring comes launching into oblivion, so just do not, just wait, trust me, learn from my mistakes here. So we'll go ahead and barely pull back on that trigger, all right, and we're gonna remove that transfer bar. It'll wiggle right out, all right? So just be careful, do not over pull that trigger. Transfer bar is out. Now we're gonna focus on the Pawl and the Pawl spring. What you'll do is, what I would recommend, if you're not making a video, I would just take your rag and just push and just put it over top of the trigger assembly and just push forward on the Pawl and let it just pop out, that spring. And that way it's captured, you're good, you don't have to worry about it. Some guys do, you know, they put a bag in, you know, they do it inside of a plastic bag too. That's also a possibility. Since I'm making this video, I have to at least give you a demonstration, and good thing we're an iPro here. So I'm taking my 3/32 punch and I'm going to push down on that spring and plunger just so I don't lose it, and I'm going to slowly back, you know, slowly back it out. It's under tension. There it is. So you can see that thing is ready to fire. Alright, so there's the spring and plunger there, the Pawl spring and plunger. So we'll set that aside. Now we can go ahead and remove the Pawl. Alright. And we're going to do some sanding on this, on that underside. Make a little note right there, because it's all going to be in a bunch of pieces here in a second. We're going to be going through it. Alright, we're getting there, making progress. This is your cylinder latch up here, so as you're pulling that trigger and you're rotating cylinder, this is what's locking into the cylinder each time. We'll actually polish the top of this as well. No need to remove it right this second. We actually need to remove this trigger, but before we do that, we need to remove the actual trigger return spring. There's all the tension in there. So it'll make it a lot easier once we get rid of all that tension. So we're going to tap out this latch retaining pin, and then remove the trigger guard latch, the trigger return spring, and then the trigger link plunger inside. Let's go ahead and do that now. So we have to compress that trigger guard latch, like so, and then push out the pin, just like that. All right. Now we're going to remove the trigger guard latch, and you'll notice that cut there on the top. That's how the pin locates, right? Set that aside. Now we've got our factory trigger return spring. Set that aside. Then there's the actual trigger link plunger right here. And that's what captures the end of the spring. Then the actual trigger link is what locates right there in that recess. And you'll see down inside the hole, you can see the link just a little bit. It's hard to see, but we'll see it here in a second. You can get a better view actually right here is the link down in there. So now we'll set those parts aside. Next we're going to tap out this trigger hinge pin right here. Real simple. Take your small punch 1/16 again and just push it right out. Alright? Nice and easy. Now this is super critical. You'll see here in a second. So here's the trigger and here's the trigger link right here. Okay? And that's what I was talking about, that locates inside that little tiny recess on that trigger link plunger. Right? That goes inside the trigger guard, and then the trigger return spring is captured in there, and that's what creates that tension on the trigger. Alright, this is most important right here. You'll notice this little tiny piece, which is your trigger plunger, okay? And this is how it locates in there. You know, the hinge pin goes through just like that. So the forward end, you can see how it all locates the shape and everything else. It's real easy to just have this fall out on you. Right? Just flew out like that. But this is the way it locates, just like that. So when it's inside, when we're reinstalling this, definitely take notice. You want that flat bottom smooth edge on the bottom of the trigger, right? And then you want this feature to be pointing up. It's a little tiny point. So I guess this bigger cutout will be on the bottom, is a good way to remember it as well. You got those two big cutouts and that flat edge, those are going to be on the bottom. And it's going to sit and reinstall just like that. All right? Very good to take notice of. Okay, for now we're just going to pull it out, set it aside. Alright, so if you're following along and you're doing it right, this is what you should have out here in front of you. And I really appreciate you following along and doing this with me. I know this is definitely a whole new element. You know, the revolver and all these new components and parts. It's just really exciting to do something different. This is the first revolver video I've done, which is just fun. I mean, I'm enjoying this total new experience here. So I'm eager to hear your feedback as we go along. I know this is going to be a really in-depth video, so I appreciate you following along with me. Let's run through all this stuff real quick. You know, it's nice to learn the nomenclature, run through it, just to memorize it. It's good to understand how it all interacts, and then obviously to see what the differences are so that we can notice anything that may be going back together incorrectly as it happens. So we'll go from top to bottom here. Here's our hammer dog pivot pin, hammer dog plunger and spring inside the hammer here, and then our hammer pivot pin here. That's all one assembly right there that goes inside the top, obviously, of the frame. And then we've got our pistol grip. We've got our grip covers, we've got our grip cover screw, and then we've got our grip retaining pin, and then we have our mainspring assembly right here, which includes the hammer spring itself, and then the hammer strut, and then the mainspring seat, and then obviously the disassembly pin, which is holding it all together right at this moment. We'll go further into the disassembly shortly. Next, we've got the trigger guard and the trigger guard components over here. So we've got the trigger guard itself, and then we've got the cylinder latch right here. We're gonna leave that installed for now. Then we have our trigger with the trigger link right here sticking out, and that's an important feature to recognize and take notice of. Then we have our Pawl spring and Pawl plunger. We've got our trigger pivot pin, and then we have our trigger link plunger right here, which goes inside the trigger. Now this Pawl spring and detent go with the Pawl, which is right here. This is our Pawl, and this is our transfer bar up here. So these two are not to be confused. You can see they're very different. The transfer bar is much larger and the Pawl is much smaller, and it's got some different features as well. Then these four components go inside the trigger guard, starting with the trigger link plunger right here, and then the actual trigger return spring, and then the trigger guard latch, and then the actual trigger guard latch pin. Those all go in one assembly right here, and they're captured inside the trigger guard. Let's go ahead and focus on the trigger guard now. We'll do some polishing and get going. Most of the polishing is going to happen here in the trigger guard and the trigger assembly area. Now we're going to mark some things really quickly as we go through it. Now here's your transfer bar. You can see there's a lot of wear right here. We're going to go ahead and polish this up. So I'm just making a little mark right there. Same here. Polish it up. It's not going to hurt it. All right, because once we get cruising with the Dremel, it's going to be just fast. You'll notice that a lot of this stuff is mass produced and it's machining, you know, and it's speeds and feeds. So sometimes they speed it up and they slow it down. Certain features are going to be a little rougher than others. This is your trigger sear. We're definitely going to polish this a little bit. We just want to make it as nice and clean as possible. Now, polishing isn't going to affect the geometry in a negative way. Now, I don't recommend you sit there and polish it for 16 hours. Use some good sense there. We want to be as practical as possible. We're just trying to refine it. The cylinder latch, we're going to just polish that so it's nice and smooth and crisp. You'll see here in the trigger guard, there's a lot of really rough edges. You know, some of this stuff is for general fit. Now the inside where the trigger actually will be moving back and forth inside the trigger guard, we're going to polish that. We're going to put the shims in there as well. Also, we're going to do something inside here where the actual trigger return spring moves back and forth. I'll mention that here in a second. And the Pawl. The Pawl is what actually rotates down here, and you can see upon closer inspection all that shininess. That's from the Pawl grinding. You've got steel on steel here just grinding, so it's polishing itself more or less, and you can see in the bottom of the Pawl it's super shiny. So we're gonna go ahead and just polish that up right there while we're at it. And then obviously the bottom of the Pawl, we've already marked that. Set that aside. Okay, so that's good. So now let's jump into what we're doing inside the trigger guard here. So you're gonna take a 1/4-inch bit, and you're only going to turn it by hand. This is just to get some of those burrs and chips out of there. You'll notice there's actually one free hanging. There's a piece of metal free hanging. So they come down with the end mill real quickly and just punch a hole, and it's pretty rough. Now it does affect the function because the trigger return spring goes back and forth. So when you put your 1/4-inch bit in here and you just rotate it by hand, you'll feel it. A lot of rough marks. Now you don't want to punch it through here and wallow that out because that's where the actual plunger's captured. So we want it to be that same diameter hole. So this is very gingerly here, right? We're just being very delicate. This is not demo day. This is very intricate work. You're doing these minor, sweet little improvements that help with the overall function. And it's all these minor tweaks that are going to make the big difference. So no need to justify your action by getting a drill and going to town here. You're going to damage things, and you will have to get factory parts from Ruger. You can really feel it start to smoothen out, which is nice. That feels good. Just want to be careful not to go too far. You'll feel it grab. When you go too far, you'll feel it grab. So don't turn, you're just using a little bit of force. So don't start wrenching on it. Obviously not using a drill here. We would never use a drill. It would just be too much. You can take material off, but you cannot put it back on. And that's one of those hard lessons learned, unfortunately. All right, that feels pretty good. After the 1/4-inch bit, you're gonna grab a 15/64 bit. You're gonna put a piece of silicon carbide sandpaper on here. It's metal sandpaper for smoothing out metal. Now it's 1000 grit, all right? And I just took a little tiny piece and a little bit of Scotch tape, and I just taped it to this drill bit like that on the smooth end. And we're gonna just slide this right in. The thickness of the paper and the bit make it a perfect fit for this 1/4-inch hole in here. We had to go one size smaller on the bit, so that the thickness of the paper plus the bit would allow us to get in there. All right, so you're just gonna spin it around good. You can really feel it smooth out. And you're gonna have to feed this bit in. It's gonna take a second kind of feeding it in, but once it's in, it's gonna be a nice snug fit, and it'll just smooth everything out, put the finishing touch on it, which is nice. Awesome. You can already see that difference and feel it when you're rotating that bit. Now, grab our Flitz polish. If you don't have any, we've got it. You get a ton of it, 1/2 ounce can. Then you're gonna grab a Q-tip. You're gonna go inside the actual hole here with the Q-tip, clean it up. And you're doing a little hand polishing right now, and this still counts as polishing. It's not a Dremel, but moving it back and forth, you're polishing the surfaces. And it's gonna come out nice and gray, and that's how you know you're doing it right. Start seeing that gray material on that purple polish. That's your feedback that you're getting some results. All right. And we're also going to add some synthetic grease with PTFE into this hole as well. It's going to smoothen everything out. I mean, the idea is making all these minor improvements for a big, major night and day effect. Awesome. And the polishing, you can't do any harm there. You can keep going. You can go longer than this. All right, perfect. See that? That's good feedback right there, making some results happen. You can clean up the rest of that. We're going to get it here at the Dremel in a minute. But that's the only interior work we're doing with the Q-tip, and that's easy, pretty simple. Now it's going to be Dremel time. I'm going to grab my gloves. It comes with the kit. Makes it handy because you're going to make a pretty good mess here. And obviously we're wearing Eye Pro. You don't want to get any of this flits in your eye. All right, Dremel it up. Now, coat your bit first. Okay, and that's why it's handy to have these gloves too. You know, you're going to be able to make a nice mess. You almost use your glove a little bit to hold some of that flits for you. All right. So we'll start with the trigger guard since that's what we were already working on. All right, so we're going to do the cylinder latch real quick, and then we're going to go in here where the actual pawl is moving back and forth on the trigger guard. Nice. You can see already. Look at all that. Look at all that feedback. You can see it as that bit turns black. You know you're making some progress. Awesome. All right, I'm gonna put a little more polish on here. I'm actually gonna just put it down inside on that little track. This is great. And this is actually a lot of fun, I'm telling you. I enjoy the polishing. And it's nice, you got the bullet-shaped bit, so you can get down in there real easily. Oh, we're gonna turn this into a masterpiece here, I can already tell. The good thing about polishing, you don't have to worry about getting carried away. You know, you're polishing. It's very, 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 very fine material. And it's not like sanding. You know, sanding is the wrong idea. Polishing is the correct approach. And you can see how your bit will just disintegrate. Your bit will just disintegrate if you're hitting a rough edge or if you're just pressing too hard. I think that was a combination of me doing both. There are some rough edges in here, and that's okay. You get 3 bits with this kit, which is enough for at least one application. Now you'll have a bunch of leftover flits, that's for sure. So you really just need to buy spare bits afterward. Okay, so it is handy to wipe it off as you're going and see what kind of progress you're making. Oh yeah, it's already shining up nice. I mean, look at that. That cylinder latch right there is blinging. Awesome. This is what it's all about right here. This is going to be some nice improvement. All right, now we're just polishing up the inside of the frame here. I'm just going to hit it real quick with the Dremel. This is where the actual trigger is moving back and forth, so it won't hurt to have it cleaned up. Now, if you bump the cylinder latch like I just did, you chance losing that detent and spring. You just slide it back in like that. So it's very simple to put it back in. I would recommend leaving it in place because it's a lot easier. Just be mindful that you've got your cylinder latch under tension here with a spring and a detent. This pin, you know, is fixed in there, as you can see. So it is helpful just to leave it in place. Just be careful whenever you're actually polishing inside here. You can also use your Q-tip as well. You know, you don't need to make any major polishing attempts in here. This is just, might as well, we're already here. And polishing with the Q-tip does work. You know, it's manual, but it's a labor of love. You know, it's enjoyable. Especially you got the time to do it. All right, so you can keep polishing away there. Nice, awesome. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up. And We're gonna move on to the next thing. So as I'm cleaning this up, I'm actually gonna just layer polish all over the inside of this trigger guard, because what I noticed is there's a bunch of just grime and residue as well. So since I'm using this microfiber towel, which I would recommend, you can use a t-shirt if you want, that works fine too, but these microfiber towels do a really good job picking up all that grime, and really, look at that, just polishing it right up. That's nice. So you've already done all this disassembly, you've done all the hard work, you might as well just take a little extra time to put that detail into it. And this is what's going to give you that competitive edge, you know, over any other factory firearm, especially the SP101. You're going to have a lot of stuff that you can do in here, which is great. Just a ton of opportunity here. And that's what we like. There is plenty of room for improvement. Nice. All right. There we go. I'm just trying to get all the extra polish out of there. All right, good. Awesome. There we go. All right. We're going to set the trigger guard aside. Just make sure your cylinder latch and spring and detent are still there, and press it back in like I showed you just a second ago there. Awesome. Fantastic improvement. All right. So that is done. We're going to set that aside. Now we're going to do the Pawl. All right. So on the Pawl, you'll notice we made our quick little mark there on the bottom where that pivot pin is. All right. So we're going to polish that up real quick. I'm actually going to increase the speed on this Dremel. Oh, like butter. Absolutely amazing. You can fluctuate the speed as needed. You know, I try to start slow, but if it's a flat, straight edge like that, you know, it's just fine. Go ahead, go for it. Oh, man. Woo. Look at that. Look at that bling. Oh, that's phenomenal. I love that. Awesome. That's like chrome right there. That is just fantastic. So that's the detailed work that a gunsmith would be doing for you, but now you can do it yourself and save a bunch of money and get that kind of performance and benefit without the mystery behind it all. So now the trigger, okay? So the trigger, there's a sear on here. All right, we're gonna polish it up. We're gonna slow it down on the Dremel though. All right, so I'm gonna go back to what I was doing. I was on the lower end of the speed there, and we're just gonna go through it methodically and do this sear, the top, and then a little bit on the underside, and that'll be it. And then we're gonna do the quick sides right there on the trigger as well, where the actual shims will be going, and that'll be it on the trigger. All right, now I'm going to speed it up real quick. Awesome. Now I did speed it up. Obviously the faster you go, the higher the RPMs, the more you're going to polish. You know, you're really smoothing it out a lot finer than you would on a lower RPM. And you may have saw me polish this sear a little bit, and that's totally up to you and your decision. It is blinging now, and that's what we want, so that's what we're looking for. All right, but use good judgment incrementally. You can take it off, but you can't put it back on. If you are going to run some high RPM, just do it really quickly. Don't spend half a day with it. But this is really phenomenal. I mean, this is the kind of thing that makes that night and day difference, going through all these components, because these are machined, mass produced. They're not taking this kind of detail and attention to your firearm at the factory, but fortunately you are, and you are making these awesome improvements yourself. Look at that, blinging at the top here. And that's what it's all about. This is going to be smooth as glass, just like butter when you're pulling that trigger, which is awesome, which is what we want. Once you've experienced it, you just can't go back to that gritty, nasty trigger pull. I mean, once you've experienced a nice, crisp, clean, phenomenal trigger pull, it's just hard to enjoy shooting a crappy trigger. Awesome. All right, we are done here. Phenomenal. You can see how we are just blinging now. Beautiful. This is awesome. All right, now the transfer bar is next. That's the last component. All right, that top portion, which we had put a little mark on, you can see there's a lot of wear there, same here, you know, a lot of grime, a lot of wear. So what we're gonna do is just make it nice and clean, smooth. Same down here, this little pivot pin that's attached, we're gonna clean that up as well. All right, we're gonna run a high RPM as well. And you're gonna feel it heat up. Another benefit to the gloves. There's gonna be a good amount of heat transfer. You can do the whole part. This thing is like super hot right now, so you will experience that. Oh man, I just wanted to show you the kind of phenomenal night and day difference you can make with some Flitz polish and a Dremel and these felt bits. And we're using felt bits, we're not sanding, nothing, nothing harsh. We're just running a high RPM and this thing is blinging. I mean, this is like a chrome part now. And the cool thing is you got rid of all those machining marks. If you noticed before, there were a lot of machining marks from the end mill. Now, those are gone. Those swirls that you saw earlier in the metal. Now it's just one clean, smooth, precision part. Just looks fantastic. This is the detail work, takes time, takes a little attention, and this is why you pay a gunsmith. They're gonna do, they're gonna put some labor in for you, but it's nice that you can do this yourself. Nothing really mysterious or complicated about it, and you're doing it safely. You're just polishing, you're not sanding. Can't go wrong there. Phenomenal. So we are done with the trigger guard and the components. We're gonna move on to the next phase. All right, now we're gonna start on the hammer assembly. Now I'm gonna change out the bit on this Dremel real quick. On the Dremel, you got this lock right here, this button. You hit that button and then you're able to actually remove the nut, slide out the bit, pull that nut off, and then there's a collar underneath. Most of these rotary tools are gonna have this setup. You're gonna take your felt bit, you're gonna take that nut, slide it on, and then take your collar, slide it on, and then you're gonna slide that assembly, collar, nut, the whole thing, you're gonna press it down, and then you're actually gonna hit the button, and you're gonna tighten it up. Now, before you make that final couple turns, you can pull out a little bit on that bit to give you a little offset. Tighten it up while you're holding that button. You're good to go. Nice, and always double check to make sure it's good and secure. You can also use some pliers to give it one more good turn. There we go. Nice. All right, now let's do some more polishing. So with the hammer, there's a spring and detent in here. We're gonna go ahead and just pull that out. We don't wanna fire that off into oblivion. We are gonna actually polish the sear down here on the hammer. So the underside and the top, okay? That's all we're gonna really polish, and then the sides a little bit as well, make it nice and smooth. And then this actual pivot pin, the hammer pivot pin, we're gonna polish that as well, because that's what's actually inside the hammer as it's operating. So all these little incremental improvements help. And same with the hammer dog, we're just gonna polish the whole part, and that's fine. All right, let's get to it. Start with the hammer dog. We run a high RPM. I'm also going to put a good coating on the actual bit to start with. And you can run a slow RPM. You can really slow it down. I'm just going to do short, high RPM. That works. That's an easy part, fly out of your hands. That one's a little challenge because it is small, but look at that, already made a major difference, at least on the edges where it's most critical, and you can keep going there, shine up that whole thing. I'm just going to touch it up a little bit more, lay it flat in the towel. Awesome. And we are good to go. That is a nicely polished precision part. Phenomenal. That's awesome. They don't have time to do that at the factory, so that's nice that you're able to do that for yourself. You know, this is a nice investment for the long term, the future. You're going to have these a long time, so might as well do it right from the beginning. All right, now the pivot pin, we're going to polish this up as well. That is hot. Ah, progress. I love it. Now this is gonna bling too. That is awesome. Wow, phenomenal. So we'll put some synthetic grease with PTFE on there. You notice that I use the needle nose pliers. That was handy. You know, it does help a little bit. You could also put a little bit of tape on the inside so that you don't chance scratching up the outside of this pivot pin here. That'd be a good idea. Didn't really scratch it up, but if we're going to be as detailed as we are, I would put a little tape there. It is kind of tricky holding some of these parts, so it's definitely a challenge. Good things to think about as you're going through this process. All right, now we're going to polish up the sear here on the hammer. telling you, this is addicting. It's easy just to get... You'll probably want to end up polishing your whole firearm here. So I'm going to do the sides while I'm at it. All right. Good to go. Wow. That's exactly what we want there. Now I'm going to take a Q-tip and just get the rest of it here in this little crevice. You're going to have some grime that's going to be hidden. So just clean it all up. Remove all that polish that's lingering, and then we are good to go. Move on to the next step. This is exciting. This is cool to see the progress in action. All right, cool. That is it for the hammer assembly. Now we're going to move on to the actual hammer strut. Alright, so I'm going to set hammer assembly components aside, and we are going to remove this mainspring assembly. We're actually going to remove this mainspring seat and the hammer spring, and then focus on the hammer strut. Alright, so now we need to remove the hammer spring from the actual hammer strut here. Just remember the orientation of everything. We've got that slope, right? This is straighter back here, this is sloping up here, right? And you got this kind of like little teardrop kind of facing the front. And then you've got this feature here where you've got these two prongs that are facing forward. So remember we talked about that earlier, how these two prongs are facing tip of the barrel. Same with this slant, this slope is facing the tip of the barrel. Now we're just going to compress it on this bench block here, and you're going to push out the pin. You can just push it out, pull it out, there you go, done. So now we're going to set the OEM spring aside. Now we're going to polish up this actual hammer strut here. There's some of the engagement points here, especially on the end. This little teardrop we were just calling it. We're going to polish that up real good, and then we'll be done polishing. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and just lather up our hammer strut here. We're going to hit the whole thing. The edges, sides, we just want this to be nice, clean, smooth part, no rough edges. And that is the whole goal with the polishing, getting rid of those rough burrs, edges, and everything else. I already got some polish on the bit here, so let's go. Man, that is phenomenal. Oh yeah, this is awesome. That's exactly what we want. A nice, smooth, burr-free part. That's all we're doing there, is we're smoothing out all the material. There's no advantage to having burrs and rough edges. Wow, this is fantastic. I can't wait. All right, let's put it all back together now. We're gonna install our 9.5 pound hammer spring, our 7.5 pound trigger return spring, the trigger shims and the hammer shims, and also synthetic grease with PTFE. We're gonna put it in strategic places, and then we're gonna test it out and see what we think. Let's do it. This is what you should have out here in front of you. You've got all your components completely disassembled as far as we went with the polishing. We took things a little further apart, but this is the lay of the land here now. I did keep a couple things out that I want to go over briefly, but you can see we went over this already once before. Now there are a few pivot pins and springs with detents that we need to go over and kind of compare and see how they interact with one another. In case you get them mixed up. Now, I do want to point out, obviously, the nomenclature, the big overview, bird's eye view, and then the schematic breakdown, and then we got some specific shots of components as far as the hammer and the trigger guard latch, and then the actual trigger itself, how things locate and the way they look. So that's handy. It's on the website. I'd print those off while you're doing this. Okay, so real quick, you've got a few pivot pins here. Now, this is the trigger guard latch pivot pin and the hammer dog pivot pin. Now they're exactly the same relatively if you get them mixed up, so you can see 287, 288, and these are thousandths of an inch here. All right, 287, so they're the same length, and then thickness they are 76. So you can see they're exactly the same pins. So if you get them mixed up, the two small ones, it's fine. You can use them, they're universal. And then the longer pin, this is obviously going to be for the trigger. This is the trigger pivot pin right there, it goes in the middle. So we're going to put those back in a second. And then I also want to point out that you've got your hammer, this is your hammer dog spring and detent. All right, so that is what detent or plunger, whatever you want to call it, hammer dog spring and detent plunger for the hammer. All right, that'll be up there. It's the shorter one. The longer one is for the Pawl. So this is the Pawl spring and Pawl detent. So that's going to go obviously with the trigger. So I just wanted to do that little demonstration so that when we go into this, in case you get them mixed up, you've got a point of reference. All right, the other thing is we're going to go ahead and open up our MCARBO trigger spring kit. This has got a lot of great components in it. This is exactly what you need to get that precision fit. So we're going to be getting rid of some of that wobble, some of that slack and play and the side-to-side movement on the trigger and on the hammer. And it'll also help prevent some of that wear. If you're getting wear on the side of your hammer or the side of your trigger, it's dragging. Those are the things we want to correct. We don't want to have any sort of imperfections. And it's really easy to tell the difference between the MCARBO springs and the factory springs. The MCARBO springs are actually ground on the end. So you'll notice that right off the bat. And that is just a precision method to make sure we got the exact length every time. And I like it because it's actually flat. It's a flat surface compared to the factory, or it's just a random wound spring. It looks like a spring you get out of your mattress or something. So I like that these are precision ground on the ends. That's the way we do it. So a quick demo side by side. You've got the factory spring here and then the MCARBO hammer spring here, both hammer springs. So the idea is to do a combined reduction, right? So the MCARBO spring is a lot lighter. You can see it wanting to jump out of my hand there on the left than the actual factory hammer spring. So we've got a 9.5 pound hammer spring here by MCARBO. The factory spring's like 14, something like that. It's really heavy. It doesn't need to be that heavy. So it's a combined reduction. So we'll put the factory spring away over here in another bag. And then we've got our MCARBO trigger return spring, precision ground on the ends. And then the factory spring here, you can just see big coil, and it's not even, so that's part of a problem too. What I love about the ground ends and the spring is that it's even tension. The spring tension is even all the way around. All right, so you can feel it. And when you put them, when you do this demonstration, you'll feel the difference. But you can see the spring difference is there. The MCARBO spring is lighter. It's a 7.5 pound trigger return spring, right on the money. So we do this exact kit to give you the best trigger pull reduction. We're not playing around here. We want the maximum benefit without any sort of detraction. We don't want any negative experiences. So the goal is to have great primer ignition every time, but to have a nice, smooth, clean trigger pull. So we're doing that with this combined reduction, 9.5 pound hammer spring, 7.5 pound trigger return spring, which is phenomenal. And we tested it to ensure that we would have the exact best trigger pull reduction possible, best trigger job possible for the SP101 or the GP100, or actually a wide variety of the Ruger double action pistols. And we'll go into that more on the website. But obviously here's the trigger shims too. Really thin, 1/1000th of an inch. So you really dial it in. And that's the nice thing about these shims. You've got very, very precise adjustments. So you can stack these two together to give you 2/1000ths of an inch on either side. So that's 4/1000ths gap that you're gonna fill up, which is great. And then on the actual hammer, you've got 4 5,000 shims, so you can do a maximum of 20,000ths adjustment on the actual hammer. So you're gonna actually eliminate a lot of that side-to-side wobble. And then, of course, the synthetic grease of PTFE. This is great. This is Teflon grease. This is what we recommend and we use on everything. And we're going to spread this around in certain places to help increase the lubricity, improve performance all the way around. I mean, we've come this far, we might as well put the finishing touches on it. So let's get into it. I just want to give you that quick overview, and I'm going to spread things around here so that I'm organized. You know, I've got little batches of parts. So I've got my trigger guard batch that I'm going to have set aside. I've got my hammer batch over here, and then I've got my mainspring batch that I'm actually going to set up right this second. You can see it right there. So there's the mainspring assembly, here's the hammer assembly up here, right? And then my trigger guard assembly down here, and then I got the grips over here, and then I've got a couple more pins. The longer pin, remember, that goes with the trigger, and then I need a small little pin for the hammer dog, and then a small little pin for the trigger guard latch. So there we go. I've got everything broken down and situated the way I want it. You know, it makes sense. It helps kind of keep everything organized and less intimidating, which is always a good idea doing a big, complex project like this. You've made it this far, guys. Congratulations. This is awesome. This is a real in-depth, detailed video. A lot of hard work here, but I'm telling you, you're going to be really proud of yourself, and thankful you did it. Let's get after it. All right, so as a bonus, we're actually going to touch up the end of this crown here. So you can see there's some burrs on the end, and this is brand new. So this is way you probably got it from the factory, the way yours looks now. You can see some unevenness there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a brass muzzle lapping tool. This is a 45-degree lapping tool, and it's going to go in like this, evenly deburring the end of the barrel here. So the deburring the crown on the inside of the lands and grooves there. On the rifling, there's these micro burrs that are actually a problem. They're going to actually impact the accuracy of the firearm, making it difficult to get the most performance. Then we're going to take some silicon carbide lapping compound, put it on the tip of this lapping tool, and then we're going to run it in the drill, which is great. It doesn't take much to do all this. Kind of like what we were doing earlier with polishing. Real simple and easy. All right. Boom. Literally just like this. So we're going to get it going at medium speed, get it in there, and we're just deburring the end of the barrel here, deburring the end of the crown. All right, wow. Already there's a nice improvement. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to wipe off the excess. Let's just kind of see quickly what kind of improvement we already got. It's helpful to at least see the progress. Wow, that's already taking those burrs out. Nice. All right, so let's keep going with it. It may help to actually just paint it in there. All right, and this is a medium grit lapping compound. Nice. Just keep an eye on the progress as you're going. Wow, way better. You can actually see clean edges. Now you can see the rifling in there, but on the crown here, those burrs are gone, those uneven surfaces are gone. It's much more uniform. Wow, okay. Let's keep going with it. You know, we're making some improvement here. Wow, and that's it. We're done. That's phenomenal. And that did exactly what we needed it to do. We just took out all those burrs and rough edges. I'm actually gonna wipe it off a little more here so we can see it. Beautiful, look at that. Way better than what we started with. You can clearly see the rifling now. There's no more, there was almost like some grit or some kind of carbon buildup here because of the uneven finish, which this smoothed it right out. That's great, and it's real quick and easy. So you take that silicon carbide lapping compound with the brass lapping tool. The brass lapping tool, we're using brass because it'll wear, and you can see that tool already wore on us. And that's the goal, is we want this tool to wear. We don't want the actual steel to wear. So that's why we're using a softer material here to do the finishing work, which is fantastic. That looks great. And if you want to take it up another level, you can go ahead and throw some of your polish on the end of the crown there. And we've already got the Dremel hooked up with the bullet-shaped bit. So we're going to polish it off because we use that medium grit silicon carbide. So now we're going to polish it off with a real fine polish. Bring it up to a nice bling and shine. That is absolutely amazing. So what we did was we took it from a really rough, gritty, burred surface to a nice, smooth, beautiful, even crown, right? So when these are being machined, it's very fast. You know, to bring down the cost of a firearm, you have to increase your speed of the machine. Machining time is cost. So what they do is they obviously crank these things out. They're not doing this detailed finish work, so it's really nice to be able to do this. Oh, that's amazing. You can feel how smooth that is. Just look at what we started with, back up this video, and see where we are right now. So with that brass lapping tool, and then the silicon carbide, the medium grit, and then we took some polish with that felt bit. Nothing wrong there. We didn't remove anything that would be detrimental. We just finished up the crown a little bit finer. We smoothed out all those burrs. I mean, there's no benefit to having a burr on the end of your crown, which is exactly why you wouldn't want to smash the end of your muzzle off of a rock or the concrete or anything like that, because you add burrs, you add deformed edges that will throw off that bullet as it's coming out of the end of the barrel. So this is really great to be able to do this kind of finishing work. Fantastic. Nice. All right, so that was just a quick little bonus. So now let's put the rest of this SP101 back together. All right, so now we're putting everything back together. We're starting with the trigger guard first. Now we're gonna install the trigger shims and the MCARBO 7.5 pound trigger return spring over here. But what we wanna do is pick up where we left off. So you can see here that we've got our cylinder latch, everything's polished and beautiful. Look at all that, just amazing. We've got the inside where the actual trigger return spring is going to be moving back and forth. So I don't forget, I'm going to go ahead and put some synthetic grease with PTFE in there. And I'm going to take punch and just kind of pack it in there and swirl it around. Alright, you can use as much or as little as you like. We are going to come back to that, but just so I don't forget. Now what we are going to do is quickly drop in the trigger. When we do this for real, we're going to want the actual trigger link to go inside the trigger return spring housing. So you can see I just lifted it up and put it right inside the housing. Alright, and what we're going to do is put in the pin, and then we're going to use our feeler gauge to see how much gap we have. It's much easier. Just put the pin on the back side and then line up the holes and then press down. Alright, so we got that. Now we want to go ahead and measure with the feeler gauge where we're at. Got the feeler gauge right here. I've got 3,000s, 4,000s, 5,000s. That's about where we want to be. Now you can push it to one side. Alright, so I got the trigger pressed to one side. I'm just going to measure the gap on this side here. Okay, so 3 was really loose. 4, it's a little tight. And 5 won't even go. So 5 won't go. 4 is tight. 3 will. So we want to have a little bit of room, a little bit of clearance so the trigger can operate freely and smoothly. So we're only going to do 1,000 shim on each side. So we're only going to use 2 of these. Alright, but that's what we wanted to figure out. So we're going to go ahead and press that trigger pivot pin back out. Remove the trigger. Take our synthetic grease with PTFE. And we're going to go ahead and coat the sides. We're going to go ahead and coat the sides of the trigger. Now we're going to pick up our shims, which it's easy to do when you got a little bit of grease on your finger, especially as thin as these are. And they'll stick right there to the side of the trigger, which is great. Take another shim, drop it in there. Perfect. Alright, and then take your 1/16 of an inch punch. Make sure they're all lined up, which that one wasn't exactly. So we're going to go ahead and try again. There we go. All lined up. Perfect. Alright, you can see right through it. Now when we go ahead and put it in, we want to make sure that we have this actual trigger link in place. So the trigger link is going to drop into that trigger return spring housing right in there. Alright, which we polished up earlier, which should operate real nicely now. Okay, so you see those shims want to immediately press out. It is a snug fit. So we're just going to tap them in as we're going into the housing. And it's a little bit of finesse. And basically you're going to push them so that they're lined up, and you will take your punch and get them all lined up. Boom. Alright, just like that. So they're all lined up now. Alright, now that our shims are on the side of the trigger is in the trigger guard, we want to drop in our trigger plunger. And you want to make sure that you drop it in just like so. So that flat bottom is going to be going in just like that. Alright, and it's going to be, that point is going to be towards the cylinder latch. Now you're going to drop it in just like that into the trigger. Okay, now you want it to be flush. Alright, so you may have to tap it a little bit. You may have to pick it up a little on that opening and push it, ride it forward. You want it to get, that notch needs to get under that feature right there on the actual trigger. Alright, it's going to locate there, and it's all going to fit nice and flush right here. Alright, now we can go ahead and make sure our holes are lined up. Alright, put our punch through. We'll use it as a guide. We're going to insert our trigger pivot pin now. Okay, and the cool thing is you can push on that pivot pin and it's going to push out that punch. Now if you have any resistance along the way, you can move that punch up and down to make sure you're centered. But it should be pretty seamless just like that. Man, is that nice. That is what we want. All right, no side-to-side play. It's all gone. Beautiful. Man, this is fantastic. I'm excited about this. So let's put the rest of it back together. All right, just like the way we disassembled it. We're gonna drop in our Pawl spring and detent, okay? You're gonna drop that right into that recess there on the back of the trigger, okay? Holding back on the trigger, we've got our Pawl spring and our Pawl detent in place. Now we're gonna put that shaft portion of the Pawl inside that hole, right? Dropping it right in. Okay, you got it started. It's already in place. Now take your flathead screwdriver and push down on that Pawl spring and detent. Then push the Pawl all the way in, just like so. Now it's captured, but barely. We got to push back on the Pawl to make sure that it's fully seated. That's what's going to try to fling off and fire away on you. All right, so you definitely have to make sure that it's fully seated. Now when the trigger is forward, it's not trying to jump away as much because it's making contact down here, right? So you can see now it's resting a lot easier. You can almost let it go and not worry about it, but I would keep some tension on it just in case, because we actually are going to put the transfer bar in next. So the transfer bar right here, okay, it's going to drop right in like so. I'm going to pull back on that trigger a little bit, just enough to fit that transfer bar in. Then you're going to push it back down. Okay, we don't want that Pawl spring and detent flying away on us. Like I said in the beginning, you can get them from Brownells, but I would recommend not having to do that. All right, now that we got our transfer bar, our Pawl back installed, right? Everything's looking good so far. Now we need to go ahead and get the trigger return spring back in place, and it's a whole little assembly that goes in here. So first we're going to insert our plunger. Now that little detent cap portion is what's going to mate up with the actual trigger link. So we'll drop that right in. All right, we're going to drop in our trigger return spring. Slide it all in. Then we're going to go ahead and drop in our trigger guard latch. And what we're going to have to do is compress it and then simultaneously push in a pin. So it's always handy to have your bench block, and it's always good to put that pin in on the back side so that you can see as you're pushing down, and you can see it coming through the hole there. So you're pushing in on that trigger guard latch, and you're pushing down simultaneously, and you could hear it pop as it went in, right? So it's mostly there now. It's all under tension, so you can just push in on the latch and push with your finger like I just did. A little bit of grease came out of there, or polishing compound. Now, I'm still not going to let this Pawl spring out of my sight, okay? And you'll be okay now that it's all under tension, but do not pull the trigger more than you have to. I mean, once you pull that trigger, that spring is coming out, and it may disappear on you. All right, cool. So the trigger guard is back together, so we can put the rest of the components back together. Let's do that. All right, now we need to go ahead and take our trigger guard assembly that it's been put back together, put it back into the frame of the revolver. What you're gonna see here is this lip is gonna locate on the front of the frame here. Then this trigger guard latch back here is gonna ride on this surface, and you can see there's a little bit of marks there. It's because it's been friction, right? So we wanna just lubricate it a little bit, make it a little easier on ourselves to put back in place. It's no big deal. And then what we're gonna do is make sure that this transfer bar and the Pawl don't get caught under that cylinder latch there. All right, you can see it right there. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. One seamless motion. All right, we get the locate on the front. All right, wanna make sure we get our transfer bar up in there. Same with the Pawl. Okay, it's locating on the front. Good, I can feel that bite there. All right, before I snap it in place, I'm gonna verify everything is out of the way, which that transfer bar wants to kind of run away on you, so make sure it's out of the way. Good, looking good. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and take flathead and just pry in on that latch a little bit, and there we go. Okay, nice and seamless, perfect. And it's in place. Nice. All right, now we're ready to put the hammer back in. Now we're putting the hammer assembly back together. We're gonna go ahead and take some synthetic grease of PTFE and put it down in the channel here where the hammer dog will constantly move back and forth. We're also gonna insert our plunger and spring, the hammer dog plunger and spring that is, and it's a shorter one, remember that. Now our hammer dog will go in like so. You've got the longer portion of the hammer dog facing the actual sear on the hammer. All right, get them lined up, and then take your pin. It's a shorter, remember there's two of them that are short like this, your hammer dog pin, just in case you get it mixed up. I'm gonna insert that from the bottom, pushing down on the hammer dog, Make sure you got it lined up. If you're having any trouble whatsoever, take your 1/16 inch punch, go ahead and grab that hammer dog, keep it in place, and then push in with the actual pivot pin. All right, so I got it captured. Now I'm going to push all the way in with the pivot pin, just like so. Done. Nice. Make sure you got good spring tension there. Fantastic. Now that we got our hammer back together, we need to go ahead and insert that into the frame of the revolver. Now you're going to drop it right in, and you're going to pull slightly on the trigger so that it can locate. There we go. Right properly into place. Those sears have to line up between the sear on the trigger and the sear on the hammer. Now we're going to take our pivot pin, our hammer pivot pin, drop it right in, and what we want to do is actually measure how much shims we need. Now push it right through. Good. All right. Great. Now these shims are 5/1000ths of an inch, so they're a little thicker than the trigger shims, but they're still going to do a lot. Look at that. There is a ton of side-to-side play in that hammer. Unbelievable. So we're going to need to go a little higher on our feeler gauge here. We were dealing with 3, 4, 5/1000ths of an inch. Now we're going to have to go up, I would say, at least 20. And we'll go up from there. So 20/1000ths is where we're going to start. So we're just going to start on one side to see what kind of gap we've got. Man, that 20 is super loose. There's 22. There's 25. That's pretty snug. All right. And you only need to test that one side. It's going to shim the whole thing. So we can try to throw 30 in there and see what happens. Nah, that's too much. All right, so 25 would be right where you want to be maximum. You've got enough here for 20/1000ths, which is just fine. That's going to take up enough of it and leave you enough clearance so that you're not going to have any drag. We don't want to create drag, obviously, so it needs to be enough to take up a lot of that slop, but we don't want to create problems. All right, since you already got your hammer installed, now we need to go ahead and put the shims in place. And what I did was I took some synthetic grease with PTFE and I coated both sides of these 5/1000 shims, and I made 10/1000 shims out of them. All right, and that grease will keep them stuck together for the most part. Now, what we're going to do is push out this pin, this hammer pivot pin, and we're going to slide in the actual shim on each side. Okay, and since you've got your feeler gauge, the nice thing is you can take your 20/1000ths feeler gauge and go ahead and slide it in and get it to push your shim into place. So just make sure that you've got enough room. Pull your pin out far enough, and we're going to go ahead and push in on that shim and get it right lined up. You can see it lining up now. Okay, the hole is there. So now I'm going to go ahead and take my punch, put it into place, just like that, which is awesome. All right. Almost there. Perfect. So there's 10/1000ths right there. All right, and you can see a little bit of a difference already. It's not moving as much. Now we're going to put the other 10/1000ths over here. Okay. So what we need to do is pull the pin all the way out, but keep it as stable as possible. So your bench block will come in real handy right now. So go ahead and push out from the underside of this pin. Alright, pins out. Keep everything as stable as possible. I'm going to go with a little bit of a lighter thickness on the feeler gauge. 14/1000ths ought to work just fine. And what we're going to do is push these two shims into place. And that's the goal, is we don't want them to separate. So I just saw it try to separate on me. Okay, I want to make sure they're both together. Okay, I can see them both actually. So we got them in there. See how I'm kind of wallowing it out like that? As far as that helps them line up. which is nice. All right, so we got it started. Drop in that hammer pivot pin, just like so. Come over to the other side. Work our magic a little bit. Make sure they're lined up. Just gonna check. Oh yeah, you're pretty much there. Now, just like before, it does help to push down on the table as we do this. There we go. Awesome. Nice. Okay. Oh yeah, way different. Now there still is a little bit there, and yes, there will be. We still need clearance, but look at that. Took up a phenomenal amount of that play, and that's what we want. Now check inside to make sure you don't have any shims floating around in there. Make sure you got them both installed. Awesome. All right, they're both in there. We took out a majority of that play, which is great. Let's get the rest of this back together so we can do a function check, see how the overall feel is. Now all that we have left is a mainspring assembly, so that we'll be putting this together here and installing it here into the frame. What we need to do is take our bench block. It's got this nice convenient little cutout. It's going to help us when we put this mainspring seat into the actual hammer strut here. But quickly, before we do anything, let's just review this one more time. This is the way that it'll go together, more or less. You know, you're going to have your spring on here, but these 2 points, you know, this feature on the mainspring seat is pointing forward towards the tip of the barrel. This slant on the hammer strut, as you can see, is pointing towards the tip of the barrel with those 2 points on the mainspring seat. So these features line up together and they point towards the tip of the barrel. Very important. Let's go ahead and do what we got to do here. Finish up the assembly. I'm going to take this synthetic grease with PTFE and I'm going to go ahead and coat it up real good. Make it nice and lubricated, right? It's going to give us that nice premium feel when we're done. All right, then we're going to take the lighter hammer spring, the 9.5 pound hammer spring. All right, so we got our bench block here. Go ahead and take your mainspring seat, situate it like that, so that your hole is in the opening. And we're going to push down with the actual hammer strut, and then we're going to push our pin right into the hole on the hammer strut. We just want to make sure we got that slope feature in the same direction as those points on the mainspring seat. So we are going to do this all at once here. You're pushing down and pushing your disassembly right in, disassembly pin right in. So we push down, compress the spring, and we got it captured just like that, which is great. You can see those 2 points in the slope right here. Boom, we got it. All right, now that we get our mainspring assembly back together, let's go ahead and insert that back into the frame. We're going to go ahead and locate this portion back up inside the frame first, and then we will also get that mainspring seat to sit on that little notch right there. And notice those little prongs are facing towards the end of the barrel, and so is that slope portion of the hammer strut. Now we'll cock the hammer back so we can drop out our disassembly pin like so, set that aside, and let's, ooh man, that is buttery smooth. Dang, that is nice. All right, let's put the rest of this back together. Really impressed with it so far. Excited to test the trigger pull. Let's do this. Now we're on the home stretch of the reassembly. Go ahead and insert the grip just like so, and your grip retaining pin that's going to slide in the big hole just like that. Now you're going to take your grip panels, pop those right into place. All right, both sides. Now before you do that, put your disassembly pin back in. There we go. Now go ahead and drop in that screw, tighten it up, take your flathead screwdriver and get it nice and snug. Just be careful not to over tighten it because that thread will come through the other side. You don't want that digging into your palm. Boom, there we go, perfect. That's what I'm talking about. Ooh, whoo-hoo. That is beautiful. Let's go ahead and measure this trigger pull. Now just a real quick function check. Go ahead and make sure it works double action and single action. All right, perfect. Good. Also check down inside, make sure you don't see any shims floating in there, because we did put 2 on each side, so they had to be lined up. Now it is a little misleading. Sometimes you could have one that is stuck in there, so just be careful. It may help to take a flashlight and inspect just to be sure, all right? So these are just some of the things we want to do that are specific to what we just did for this installation. Man, this is fantastic. I'm really excited. Now let's see what kind of double action trigger pull we got. 4 pounds, 3.8 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 4 pounds, 10.7 ounces. Well, there you have it, guys. A fantastic improvement. This is not even the same revolver anymore. I am thoroughly impressed with the results that we got. The springs, the shims, the internal polishing. We even lapped the crown of the barrel. Phenomenal. Really phenomenal. I'm excited to hear your results. Obviously, we're going to have a wide spectrum of results. You can do as little or as much as you like. If you do all the polishing and you do the springs, you're going to get these results. You're going to get from 10 pounds roughly down to 4 3/4, which is phenomenal for a double action revolver. 4 3/4 pound trigger pull on a revolver. Man, this, I'm telling you, I am really, really impressed with the action, how smooth it is. It's just buttery. I love it. I mean, this is exactly what I expected. Now, this is a fantastic pistol. It just had a lot of room for improvement. As we saw with mass production, they're not going to go through it with that kind of detail that we just did for an hour and a half. If you watched the entire video, thank you for hanging in there and listening to me ramble for that long, but I hope it was good information. I'm really excited to hear your feedback, your results. You guys keep me motivated, so this is fun. I hope it was enjoyable for you. Thank you, MCARBO Brotherhood, for your ideas and your support, and as always, happy shooting.